At the beginning of Kedoshim, last week's Parsha, we read about Pigul. Pigul, that if the Kohen, when he officiates, he has an improper thought that he's going to sprinkle the blood not at its proper time, or the korban will not be eaten at its proper time, it invalidates the korban, but not only does it invalidate it, if one eats of the meat of the korban, one is liable for koris. If you have no sir, if the meat reached the expiration time and goes beyond dawn and was supposed to be eaten, if you eat it, although before its expiration there's a mitzvah to eat it, once it passes that moment, the liability is koris. So Rav Kalatsky asks a question over there. Yeshli losis tam loma yechomer onish kohen ochel kochim chutz lismanim chiv koris yosmi ochel nevelu trei pushkotzim. If one eats meat that's not ritually slaughtered, or an animal that has a defect, kosher species, or shkotzim rodents, the liability is only malchus. So why something that originally is holy, there's even a mitzvah to eat it, now that it's become invalidated, the liability is so extreme as koris? That's the Rav Kalatsky's question. And what he's going to explain, he says something, Parshas Chukas, regarding the laws of contamination of the dead. The Torah says, Zos Chukas HaTorah. Zos Chukas HaTorah. The law regarding the contamination of the dead, that any other contamination, you're able to relieve the contamination by going to the mikveh. When it comes to the contamination of the dead, even if you go to the mikveh, unless you undergo the ritual of the paraduma, or the red heifer, you cannot be released of that contamination. So he asks, firstly, why? Why does it have this level of intensity that you need the paraduma? And also, it says, Zos Chukas HaTorah. This is the statute of the Torah. It should say, Zos Chukas HaTorah. This is the statute regarding the purification, how one achieves purity despite the contamination of the dead. Zos Chukas HaTumah. This is the statute of spiritual contamination, that this spiritual contamination is more extreme than any other contamination. Why does it say Zos Chukas HaTorah? Over there he points out that we brought the Korban Pesach in Egypt, that they had to first purify themselves had no relevance. That first came into being after Sinai. Once we became the chosen people, the Goy Kadosh, only then, when we engage in the Korban Pesach, there's a prerequisite, it cannot be brought in a state of tumah, contamination. That prerequisite didn't have to be met in Egypt. The question is why? And the principle he says there, he says the same idea, concept over here. So he explains that the law is that a Jew, the remains of a Jew, if it's in an oil, in a covered area, you walk into that area, you become contaminated, even if you did not come in direct contact with the remains. But the remains of a non-Jew, unless it's direct contact, you're not contaminated. The classification of Jews were bechinas HaKedusha, were classified as holy. Therefore, when the Kedusha leaves, when a person dies, the neshama departs from the body. All the nether forces, there he explains it more specifically, everything in existence has to be nurtured from something of Kedusha. Even the nether force has to have its sustenance as Kedusha. So the Jewish body, which is the receptacle for the neshama, which is the ultimate, there's nothing holier than the Jewish soul. So since there's a remnant of that Kedusha that's in the body, immediately when the neshama departs, all these nether forces overwhelmingly attack. It's like parasites which attach themselves to the body. These nether forces generate a level of tumah, of impurity, that even if you don't come in contact with the body, just within its proximity, under the same roof, you become contaminated. Something that's consecrated and in God's domain, that it has this level of holiness, there's nothing holier than it. So once the time passes and expires, and that kedusha is no longer there, but since that meat was initially and had that kedusha, shoralov tuma gedola. Immediately, this level of impurity immediately attaches itself. Asher koreses nefesh klosa. It destroys the neshama of the person who eats it. It's such something which is the antithesis of kedusha. Which is not the case if you eat other forbidden items. That tumah doesn't have the ability to destroy the neshama. Therefore, koreis has no relevance. And it's enough to receive malchus lashes to reinstate that person after he receives malchus. V'omro ki es kodesh Hashem chileu. When you eat the pigul, you've actually kodesh Hashem chileu. Shenikra shikra yakbet al abosa kodesh. It seems to be you desecrated what was holy. He says no. Kodesh Hashem chileu means you desecrated your neshama by eating, partaking of this. It's the consequence of the neshama. Yakbet al nefsho cheles dvar tuma, or like hitzad. Shal yidei achilas habosu mashlim maseh hashlomim. When you normally eat the korban, what do? You're affected positively by eating. Like the Gemara says that when the Kohen eats the kochim, it brings atonement. And even when the Yisrael eats the kochim, it impacts positively on his spirituality. When you eat the you're actually undoing what was accomplished. That what's classified as evil, it waits for the moment and it anticipates the moment to the location which originally had this very extreme level of kedusha. So over there he says the same thing. Before Sinai, what was our class? We were Noahites. Our neshama didn't have that dimension of holiness. Once we became a klal, we received the Torah, those chugas haTorah. Once we became attached to the Torah, and when the Shabbos became different, multi-dimensional, and we needed the Ramach mitzvahs aseh and the Shasah mitzvahs lo aseh, it's a different dimension of holiness. Now, because of that dimension of holiness, all these nether forces gravitate. It's like a magnetic force which draws all these nether forces when the remains of that Jew, or the Jew is susceptible to that. The goy over there, he says, a non-Jew comes in contact with the dead, unaffected, he says, like an animal. An animal goes to a cemetery, it's not contaminated. A Jew goes to a cemetery, it's contaminated, because the Kedusha is an entity of Kedusha. So the nether forces attach itself to him. And that's why a Jew has to be ritualized. The concept of mikvah has no relevance to a non-Jew. That we immerse ourselves to relieve of whatever the level of contamination is, this is only a Jew, because Jew has that level of Kedusha. This is the principle of the Orach Chaim. He says it here by Kochim, by Noser, by Pigul, and the contamination of the dead. When a Jew dies or a Jew comes in contact with a source of contamination, he becomes contaminated, which is not the case by a non-Jew. Second, that Noser contaminates or Pigul contaminates is purely rabbinical. Why? Because Chazal don't want you to eat it. It's a fence that you shouldn't come to eat it. That identifies its off limits. On the Torah level, it doesn't contaminate. It's only if you would eat it, then it has the liability of what? Of koris. Because it has this intense level of impurity due to all the nether forces attaching themselves to what initially had that exceptional level of Kedusha. So by the remains of a Jew, it's a different story. We say the remains of an animal, which we call nevela, nevela contaminates. Not only does nevela contaminate direct contact if you carry it, but that contamination, you go to the mikveh, you relieve it immediately, you just have to wait till nightfall. What about if you carry the nevela? You don't even come in direct contact. You carry it in a receptacle. It's called tumas masa. You're even contaminated there. Not only you contaminate, if you touch a sheretz, you touch a dead rodent, you touch the carcass of an animal, you become contaminated. What about your clothing? Do your clothing become contaminated? Clothing don't become contaminated. But if you're wearing the clothing and you carry the nevela, that's called tumas masa. Not only you contaminated, your clothing are contaminated. Here, if you touch nevela, you're contaminated. If the nevela does not touch your clothing, the clothing do not have to be immersed in the mikveh. But if you carry the nevela, not only you contaminated, even your clothing is contaminated. It's called yidi kibbutz begadim. We just had it before regarding a zava, a nida, all these various laws. Sometimes it contaminates just the person, and the times where contamination contaminates the person who engages because it's a more advanced level of contamination. So it's interesting. You touch the nevela, you're contaminated. Your body, you carry the nevela, even the clothing which don't come in contact with the nevela, even they become contaminated, and it has to be immersed in the mikveh. Parshas Emor, v'yom Hashem el Moshe, Emor el Kohanim. You should speak to the Kohanim. Who are the Kohanim? Bnei Aaron. Only the male. Only the male line of Aaron, not the female line. The daughter of a Kohen, she's permitted to contaminate herself. The daughter of a Kohen, if she's not married to a non-Kohen, she's permitted to eat kosher. She's permitted to eat truma. The wife of a Kohen is permitted to eat truma. But the female is permitted to contaminate herself. Because it's only the one who's the officiant, which is only the male, not the female. Only that person is not permitted to contaminate himself. Of course, when he contaminates himself, he actually disqualifies himself from avodah. Because he's qualified to do the avodah, that means he's more advanced level. The woman who's not qualified, because it's only b'nei Aaron, therefore there's no reason why she shouldn't come in contact with the contamination of dead. V'amarta aleim, what you should say to them, l'nefesh le'itam abamov, to the remains of a human being, he should not be tabit ba'amov. That's only if there's somebody else who could attend to the needs of that person who died. This is the whole concept of mes mitzvah. If a person comes upon a mes mitzvah, a Jew, and there's nobody to attend to his burial needs, which is considered a disgrace, although a Kohen is permitted to contaminate to his 7 relatives, to an ordinary Jew is not permitted. But if it's mes mitzvah, he has an obligation to contaminate. What about if he's a Kohen Gadol? He's a high priest who's not even permitted to contaminate even to the 7 closest relatives. If it's a mes mitzvah, he contaminates. We're going to learn about Nazir. A Nazir, a Nazirite, because he entered into this state of Kedusha, he's not permitted to contaminate even to the 7 closest relatives. But to a mes mitzvah, he contaminates, similar to a Kohen Gadol, to a high priest. What about if he not only is he a Kohen Gadol, simultaneously he's also a Nazir. A Kohen Gadol, that's a Nazir. He has compounded level of Kedusha. Each one in its own right, he's not permitted to contaminate to the 7 closest relatives. But he's a Kohen Gadol and a Nazir, he comes upon a mes mitzvah, he contaminates. That's the degree of the value of what? Of kavod habrios. That to attend to the need of a Jew who's lying unattended, his remains, it's so important to address that. It overrides the Kohen Gadol, overrides the Nazir. That's how important it is. We find the Gemara, there's a concept known as kavod habrios, that when it's a question of human dignity, it's always an overriding factor. I mean, this is clear. I mean, by contamination of the dead, you could be a Kohen Gadol who cannot contaminate to the 7 closest relatives. He contaminates to the mes mitzvah. A person's a Nazir, he's not permitted. Mes mitzvah, yes. What about if it's compounded, Kohen Gadol and Nazir? Also. The Gemara says in Shabbos that a person has to do his bodily functions. And after he does it, he has to clean himself. and he has to use muktzah, like clumps of earth, which are muktzah, rabbinically muktzah, is he permitted to take those clumps of earth, or let's say vegetation that was cut, brush, which is muktzah, and he wants to clean himself with that? Is he permitted? The Gemara says he's permitted, because that's kavod habrios. Anything which has to do with human dignity, we give it special value, that becomes an overriding factor. And therefore he cleans himself. There's a halacha cited in Shulchan Aruch, that the halacha is that the Torah says that if you have a four-cornered garment, you must put tzitzis on the garment. What about if you wear the garment without tzitzis? You're a violation of mitzvahs haseg. Because Torah says when you wear a four-cornered garment, you must put tzitzis. Now, what about if it's Shabbos? You wear a four-cornered garment on Shabbos without tzitzis. Are you in violation of mitzvahs haseg? So there's a famous Mordechai who's one of the early commentators, says you're not. Why? The Torah never says that you must wear a four-cornered garment with tzitzis. It doesn't say that. It says when you have a four-cornered garment, you must tie tzitzis onto the corners. Now, Shabbos, you're not permitted tzitzis on a four-cornered garment, because tzitzis, to attach them, you have to tie it. You have to make a permanent knot. And since there's a Torah violation of kosher, it's one of the 39 malachos that you're not permitted to do on Shabbos, you're not permitted. So if the person that wears a four-cornered garment on Shabbos, are you in violation of not wearing tzitzis? The Mordechai says you're not. You're not in violation. Why? Because your hands are tied. Because the Torah never says you have to wear a four-cornered garment with tzitzis. Torah says when you have four-cornered garment, you have to tie tzitzis on the corner. Since Shabbos, you're not permitted to tie tzitzis on the corner. Therefore, on a Torah level, you're not in violation if you wear a four-cornered garment on Shabbos. What about, but rabbinically, you're not permitted. Well, since normally you have to have tzitzis on a four-cornered garment, rabbinically, you're not permitted. What a person's in shul, and he checks his tzitzis, and he realizes the puzzle. And he's going to sit in shul, everybody in shul are wearing talisim, and he's going to sit in shul without a talis. Is he permitted to wear the tzitzis, the talis, although the tzitzis he's wearing, the talis wearing, the tzitzis are not valid? Is he permitted? It's cited, the Mogen Avraham says, he's permitted. Because to sit in shul where he sticks out like a sore thumb, everybody else wears tzitzis, it's a question of kavod habrios. It's human dignity. He'll be embarrassed. So that he's embarrassed, that becomes the overriding factor that there's rabbinical law of wearing a four-cornered garment with tzitzis on Shabbos, which is only rabbinical, that's actually overridden. He's permitted to sit with the talis, although it doesn't have kosher tzitzis. We see from here, this is the concept of what, because we see how much the Torah goes out of its way to value kavod habrios, that it becomes an overriding factor. The Torah is like reiterating. Say to the Kohanim, and again it repeats it. That an adult has to be careful that even though the child who's not, he's not a person of obligation, even the child's not permitted to be contaminated. If he's a Kohen, B'nai Aaron, Yochel Chaloli, maybe what about a Kohen who's a Cholo, meaning he was conceived from a inappropriate union. The mother wasn't qualified to be married to the Kohen. She was a Grusha. She's a divorcee, a defiled woman. Talmud HaKohanim. Only if their classification is Kohanim. B'nai Aaron, Apalim Mumin, B'mashma. Even if a Kohen is blemished, he's still called B'nai Aaron. Like we have the law we had earlier, that eating kochim, the only person can eat kochi kadoshim, achatos and osham, a mincha, is only a Kohen, a male Kohen, not even the female. If a person is a Baal Mum, although he doesn't divide as part of the family, he doesn't have a share, but because he's a Kohen, he's permitted to eat even kochi kadoshim. Why? Because he's B'nai Aaron. B'nai Aaron v'lo b'nos Aaron. But a female, she's permitted. Lo yitami ba'amov, bo'cha mes v'toch amov, yotze mes v'tzah. When you're not permitted to contaminate, he's still within the community where the other people could attend to his burial needs, which excludes mes mitzvah. Mes mitzvah means there's nobody to attend to his burial needs. Then the Kohen has an obligation to contaminate himself. like any other Jew has an obligation to attend to the burial needs of that person. That's mitzvah. What about to his wife, the one who's closest to him? He's permitted. And the 7 relatives, he's permitted. His father, his mother, his brothers, his children, God forbid, he's permitted. So here's a very beautiful Siforno. The Siforno says, we find by Mitzorah, there's a pasuk in Malachi, Sibse Kohen Yishmu Das. The lips of the Kohen, meaning the teaching of the Kohen, are the keepers of the faith. Yivakish Torah Mipiyu. He's the person you should seek Torah from his teachings. Ki Malach Hashem Tzvodosu, because he's the equivalent of an angel, a spiritual angel. The Rambam rules on Hilchos Talmud Torah that a Rebbe, a person who teaches Torah, he should not, or it's based on Gemara Psochim, if a student wants to go to a bathhouse with a Rebbe, is he permitted? He's not permitted. It's not respectful. If the Rebbe is taking a haircut, should be present while the Rebbe is having his haircut. Should not. Why? So the Gemara explains, because although the Talmud, the student knows the Rebbe bathes in the bathhouse and takes the haircut, but being present automatically, it diminishes his level of reverence for the Rebbe. Although you know it, but when you see it in real time, and if it's diminished, the impact of the Rebbe teaching, you have to have a certain degree of reverence to the Rebbe to be receptive to his teaching. Therefore, the Rambam rules, if a Rebbe lets he jokes around with the students, as he jokes around with like the peers. He treats them like peers. It's a problem, because automatically that diminishes, that undermines the reverence, and therefore the teachings of the Rebbe to the Talmud would not be with the same level of seriousness. He should not eat with them in a way like they're eating like buddies. Also, it's a diminishment. That's what it is. So he explains over here, if the Kohen would go to every funeral and contaminate himself, that means he's like one of the guys. He's going into the diminishing himself like everybody else diminishes himself. But the Kohen, since the Kohen has to be seen on a pedestal, because when he's seen on a pedestal, then his teachings are valued at another level. His words are internalized differently. Therefore, the Torah says, for his own family, it's okay, because it's understood that's for his family. But if it's not his family, then he's not permitted, because that automatically creates a diminishment of this aura, and the Kohen becomes less effective, and that's why the Torah doesn't want him to contaminate himself. But when it comes to a mitzvah, it's a whole different concept. There, it's human dignity. There's nobody else to attend to his burial. Therefore, that becomes an overriding factor. That's the Siforno. Something above is Paragimel, page 374 in the Feldheim edition, Hashishi. We're saying the reason why Hashem is the one to have trust in and reliance upon, because there's nothing which he doesn't control and dictate, and only through him are you protected, are you guaranteed whatever he wants to transmit to you. What about his interest? Does God want only your best? That's the question. You have a person, he may have the ability, and nobody could interfere with if he wants, but the question is that his interest? You know, people have all kinds of conflicts of interest. They have all the reasons. You realize God has no conflict of interest. God only does something which is ultimately in the best interest of the person. You have to understand the level, the degree of goodness that God provides for the human being. Initially, the chesed and the goodness that Hashem provides for the human being, even if the person is not worthy. You know, the whole concept, Olam Chesed Yiboneh. Why did God create the world? There were no human beings. There was no existence. Because Hashem does chesed. The world was based to create a setting for man to be beneficiaries of chesed. So the same thing. When God provides whatever he provides, it has nothing to do with our worthiness. It's purely chesed, which is not based upon worthiness. It's to give us an opportunity that we should be beneficiaries of his goodness. He has no benefit. We find in Chumash Vayikra, it gives pleasure to God. What does it mean it gives pleasure to God? God doesn't need pleasure. God needs nothing. God is perfect on an absolute level. Hashem means if you've done his will, now he has the ability to reward you. Because everything's contingent upon your worthiness. And he created the world only to give you opportunity to be worthy that you should be a beneficiary of his goodness. Whatever God gives to us is nedava, it's a gift, it's goodness and chesed. He says, he explains another part of the work. You've done much wonders, and your thought is only for us what's in our best interest. There's no way to quantify who you are. If I should tell it over and speak it, it's beyond my capacity even to speak it, to explain it. It's not possible. The goodness of Hashem is not, it's at a level a person doesn't have the ability even to express it. We say in the Nishmas on Shabbos before Shochinat, in terms of what Hashem had done for us, even if who would be our ability, it's not possible to express the praise of Hashem and the thankfulness that we have for him. Because Hashem, whatever he does purely that we should be beneficiaries of his goodness. He has no agenda whatsoever. So knowing that and believing that, we always say, what he just said now, any believing Jew, if you really a little bit learned, you believe it. These are facts. We speak about schar v'onish. That's one of the tenets of Jewish belief. That God rewards and punishes because God is aware of everything. So if that's the case, why do we don't always toe the line? Or we fall short even when we do the mitzvah. We're not focused. Why? What's the reason? There are two things. There's knowing and there's internalizing. There's actually experience. Torah has to be experiential. You have to experience it. We say every night by Kriya Shema, Birchas Kriya Shema, Kehem Chayenu V'Orach Ne'emeinu. The Torah and mitzvahs is our life, and it's Chayenu and the length of our days. When you live life, do you live life or do you do life? Yeah, right? Life is something you live. When you study Torah, when you do mitzvahs, you're supposed to live it. It's not you do it. If you do it, that means it's external. When you live it, that's internalization, then you're touched by it. If you're touched, whatever he's saying over here, you keep focus, you toe the line, you don't fall short of what you should be doing. But because we don't internalize it, and we're all at that level that we can't fully embrace it, as a result of that, there's always distraction and there's always reason to fall short of what we should be doing for that reason. And we allow conflicts of interest to interfere and not to see it correctly for that reason.